All right. So, Leading Safely podcast, I was like, I have this amazing opportunity to speak with you and to share with your audience. And it's going to be an audience of people who I have never had the opportunity to speak with before. And what message would I like to share with them, right? What would give
Mm-hmm.
the most bang or, have the most impact on them? So, when I was thinking about that, I put some things together and happy to answer any questions that you might have about it or however this thing ends up working, right?
Sure.
But want to start off with I am still learning. You heard me say that a little bit ago, but just like Michelangelo, I'm still learning. And I love sharing what I'm learning with other people because I want us to all be better together. A part of that learning and a part of that story to me has to do with multi-generational learning, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're not just learning from our peers, the people in our cohort. We're not just learning from our teachers or our parents. We are learning from the entire community. And right now, there are 7 generations of people who are alive in the world today. And there are 5 generations of people who are in our workforce. And we have to learn to communicate across all of those generations because we all learn things differently. Depending on what generation we were born in, we all receive information differently. We all learned in different ways, right? I remember when I was in school, I learned cursive writing and I had to learn how to type on an actual typewriter with little green covers on it for the letters. I was actually doing coding when I was in elementary school on what I felt like was one of the first computers. So, all of those things that were happening when we were born actually influences the way that we work. And there are things that we can pick up and we can learn from people from those different generations. So you might have what's our Gen Alphas now, right, who are coming into the workplace like they didn't even have a place for them yet on the chart. But the Gen Alphas are coming into the workplace now, and they've never known a life without a screen, right?
Yeah.
Without an iPad or an iPhone or something like that. But
Mm-hmm.
there's also some of those finer things that they might not be picking up on, like that cursive writing, or maybe they don't know how to tie a tie. So those are things that people who are in generations past, if you will, can share or can teach them how to do. And conversely, maybe the baby boomers aren't really that good with tech. So our Gen Zs, our Gen Alphas can help them with that. So
Mm-hmm.
having that cross pollination, that multi generational learning and stuff can help us with collaboration. You'll have that mentoring there. It helps to kind of leverage the skills of everybody who is in the workforce. And then we talked a little bit about me before. So this is me. So I have my guys who are out in the field. So we're out there building substations and transmission lines, doing environmental compliance, keeping the lights on for the folks in the state of Georgia and across the country.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are our folks who are in the office. So all of our C-suite is here. All of our office workers are here in our Atlanta office. And I feel like I'm in the middle, right? So we talked a little bit about generational communication before. Well, I'm in the middle of this too, just like I'm in the middle of that generational communication. And I feel like I am uniquely positioned in both the multi-generational learning and in this scenario because the people who are getting ready to retire, they're about 20 years, 25 years older than me. And the people who are coming into the workforce, they're about 20, 25 years younger than me. So I'm right there in the middle. And then with what I do, I'm also right there in the middle because a large part of my job is being able to take what my guys are doing out in the field, right, to communicate their wants and their needs to the people who are here in the office. and then going the other way, being able to interpret what those rules and regulations are, sharing with them those processes and procedures, being in a position to change things, policies, procedures, guidelines for them. And I'm right there in the middle. So I have to translate both ways so that we're able to meet those corporate goals, but we're also able to meet the needs of our people here in the office. And we talked a little bit about stories earlier, and I told you, you know, I love a good story. I use stories all the time to inform. I use stories to educate, and sometimes I use stories to entertain. So all of those things are important because it relays that knowledge that we need, whether it's a cultural thing, a familial thing, whether it's work related, but we can use stories to begin to break down those barriers that we have both at home and at work. So telling stories is definitely my favorite way to communicate. And I'll tell you a quick story, right? Because I just said I love stories. So I was going to a conference in Colorado Springs a couple of years ago, and I was going to be speaking at this conference about effective communication across generations and cultures. So I thought it would be really nice to have this little graphic here about, you know, Colorado Springs so that you can kind of see where we are. So I fly into Colorado Springs, and what do I do when I get to the airport? I call an Uber, right? And the Uber comes and the guy picks me up, and we are driving and we are on our way to my hotel room, and I start like hearing him say something, but it was almost kind of like it was just noise because I didn't understand what he was saying, and I thought maybe he was talking on the phone or talking to himself, I don't know, you know, or doing some singing. I didn't know. He was just like, I heard noise, right? That was coming out of his mouth. So I'm like, are you talking to me? And he like shakes his head, yes. And I was like, I don't speak, it was Spanish. So I was like, I don't speak Spanish. And interestingly, again, remember, I'm going to this conference to talk about effective communication across generations and cultures. And I'm in this Uber with this guy who, I don't know why, assumed that I spoke Spanish. And what we were able to do is for the rest of that ride, we communicated through the head nods and by me using fingers to point or to say things. So that was kind of how we broke that down. And again, I don't know why he assumed that I was able to speak Spanish. I don't. I do speak French. But sometimes we can make assumptions, right? And Albert Einstein said that assumptions are made and most assumptions are wrong. And in this case, he assumed that I could speak Spanish. I couldn't, but we were able to work through that, and I think very creatively work through a solution to that. And he was able to safely get me to my hotel room. And as I kind of thought about that, I thought about how important communication is. And I know we've talked a lot about communication and storytelling and, you know, generational learning, but that's the way to do it, right? It's all about communication. And there are over 7,000 languages in the world. And some of these languages die every year, but there are also new words that get added to language every year. So it's really hard to almost keep track of all the things that are coming out and going in. And the English language itself has over 170,000 words. So, you know, that's another thing for you. And when we talked about words and languages dying, 170,000 words in the English language. Well, there's about 47,000 obsolete words. And I started looking up some of those obsolete words and phrases, and I was like, yeah, that's interesting. Like, I would have never known that. I would have never figured that one out. But every person, every English speaking person actually knows about 40,000 words. And even with those 40,000 words that we know, we only use about 20,000 of those words in our day-to-day conversation or language with people. And my passion project, which, we can talk about later, but one of the things that I'm doing to get prepared for my passion project is I am strengthening my French. So I'm working more and more and every day on my French, and I use Duolingo, and I'm up to 1,008 consecutive days of 15 minutes or more of learning on there. And I have learned, I was glad this morning, it was 1,339 words in French. Wow. So I say that to say that we can acquire or we can learn new languages in addition to the ones that we already speak, and we can also become fluent in those new languages. And about 20% of people who are here in America actually speak a new language or a different language, a second language. And there are some cognitive benefits, because remember, I'm still growing, right? Still trying to figure out who I want to be and what I want to do when I grow up. But there are also cognitive benefits to learning a new language. It can actually slow the progress of dementia. It can have like a protective effect on the brain, where that onset of dementia can be slowed by about 4 to 6 years. And it also gives your brain a workout, right? So it exercises your brain because you're having to juggle different language structures in your mind. So that's a very positive consequence of learning a new language. So I will keep you posted on my passion project as well as my new language learning here. And anytime anyone wants to practice French with me, please do. Call me up, let me know. Yes. So in doing that, again, a lot about learning, a lot about language, a lot about communication and how we collaborate and relate to each other. We want to make sure that we make everything as simple as possible, but no simpler, because that language and that communication is important, right? We need to be able to communicate effectively with everybody. And according to a 2019 study of employee communication and engagement, businesses, organizations, companies spend about $37 billion with a B dollars every year on poor communication. So we want to make sure that we are improving our communication and our language skills. I heard this quote when I was listening to a podcast, and it was very apropos to what I knew that we were going to speak about today. And it's by Charlemagne. Love that name too. And it says, to have another language is to possess a second soul. Because when you have another language, right, when you're able to effectively communicate with folks, you actually begin to have different cultural experiences with them. You are able to develop a different and a deeper relationship with that person. You create a different identity with you and that person that you wouldn't have with someone else, right? Because you share that language and you share those different experiences. And then you begin to actually experience the world in a different way and through a different lens, because you have that new language. And that language, that new language, what it does is it actually helps to shape what we see and our perception of reality. And we remember things differently when we learn a new language. I remember when I was younger, I would practice speaking French with my dad, and that was very special to me with him because he was teaching me those things that he remembered speaking as a child. And because growing up, he didn't have anybody as time went on to speak that language with, to speak his native tongue with, he started to lose that over time. So he was making sure to try to pass on those learnings and those things with me. And kind of like I told you with the Uber driver, language can be verbal, right? But it can also be nonverbal. So you can use those hand signals to be able to share or to communicate with people. And a couple of things that I also learned, don't know if you all knew it as well, but when you're doing that computer coding, like I talked about, I did in school, in elementary school, that's actually a language. And math is my Achilles heel, I'll tell you. But math is also a language because you can actually use it to solve problems and to create new realities. And also music. Music is a language, you know? And one of the things I told you about practicing my French on Duolingo, and I hate to make this sound like a commercial for Duolingo because it's not, but
why not?
Yeah, but they have this thing where you can practice learning music. So one of the things that I want to do, again, passion project, is to learn how to play the piano. So I'm learning that new language as well. And when I talked about culture and I talked about how it helps you to possess a different soul and to have different types of experiences and relationships and different identities. And you see this picture here, right? It's a picture of what looks like a family around a dinner table. This artwork is actually based on Norman Rockwell's Freedom from Want painting. And it shows different generations of people who are gathered around a dining table for a meal. And despite the food that's being prepared, they are all very engulfed in that conversation and that fellowship and that time that they are having together. And what it shows is that diversity of family and the different connections, again, that you can have and create when you have that familial experience, when you are communicating and when you are breaking bread, when you are sharing a meal. It actually breaks down those barriers to communication or associated with any other issues that you might be having. And also, one more interesting thing about this picture, and for those of you who are able to see and maybe not listening, this gentleman right here, that's actually my dad.
Oh.
So interesting story about that. My dad was hanging out one day and this guy walks up to him. He says, "Hey, I want to take your picture." My dad's like, "What?" And he was like, "I want to take your picture." And my dad was like, "Why do you want to take my picture?" And he tells a story about how he is an artist and the work that he was doing. And so he takes my dad's picture, and here my dad's picture ends up being in this painting. And then there's also another one that he did. But I was like, how super cool is this? And I went to, so my dad lives in New Orleans, that's where we're from. I went to, because this picture also, and the other one that you don't see, ended up being on exposition in this art gallery in downtown New Orleans. So I go there on vacation for a few days and I visit the museum, and the owner of the museum, pulls out this painting as well as the other one. And he was like, let me tell you something interesting about this painting. And I was like, okay. And he said, I got this email from Whoopi. And I was like, Whoopi? And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like Whoopi, like Cher, like Oprah, like Prince, like that Whoopi? And he was like, yeah, he was like, I totally thought it was junk mail. He said, but then, I read this email and she tells me that she was scrolling and she came across this photo or this artwork and she wanted to buy it and she wanted me to ship it to her house in Italy. And I was like, shut the front door. And he was like, yeah, so now you have like 6 degrees of separation from Whoopi and you have a great story to tell about this. And I was like, and I'm gonna tell it,
That's fantastic.
So
Yeah, wow.
again,
So your dad is actually on display in Whoopi Goldberg's house.
absolutely,
How
absolutely.
amazing is that?
And so, anyways, to bring it full circle, it's how you get there. And it's that language, it's that communication, it's having those different experiences. Now, Whoopi and I are connected, so we have those different relationships and you're able to experience things in different ways. And, I'm so happy that you and I, Georgina, were able to connect and that you invited me to speak here on your podcast, to be one of your very special guests. And I am happy to provide any help or support or assistance or guidance that I can for you or the people in your audience. And I want you to know that this has truly been a gift to me. And I hope that some of the information, the thoughts, the ideas that I've been able to share has also been good for the audience as well.
Awesome. I know for sure that they have been. So thanks again, LaRhonda. That was fantastic.
You're welcome.